Washington, the Commanders in the NFC Championship. Unbelievable. Commanders at the Eagles. Eagles 6-point favorite. Total is about 47.5. Let's just start with the game here. I have a bunch of notes and thoughts, but I want you to go first on both of these. So start with the game, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so before I make a pick, just kind of setting up, like, what am I looking for here? The first thing has to be Jalen Hurts, because that makes this game very tricky to cap, because we just don't know and won't know, frankly, until we watch the first quarter, what Jalen Hurts are we getting. I do think we're getting Jalen Hurts. He's going to play, but kind of looking at the Twitter doctors and the folks out there that I trust as best I can to understand the injury stuff, here's what I think we're going to get from Jalen Hurts. I think he plays, certainly. I think he can pass pretty well. I think he'll be able to run straight line pretty well. Where he's going to maybe be banged up is cutting, moving, escaping the pocket, kind of moving around a little bit. I think that leans in a decent direction for Philly, because I think he can drop and pass. He's going to have open receiver in this game. I think that they probably go a little more run heavy here, which is frankly what they should be doing anyway. It's the thing that Philadelphia does well, and it's why Saquon's line is like 1,000 yards for this Sunday, because he's going to run all game long. So I loved this spot before the Hurts injury. I have this somewhere around Eagles -8, totally opposite side of the key number, but it's a tough one because of the Hurts injury. So why did I like the spot early? Philadelphia defense, I think, has already shown it can handle the Washington offense. So if you look at the games they played this season, they dominated 7 out of 8 quarters in the season. First game, 26-10 on Thursday night until last 30 seconds garbage time touchdown, basically dominated by Philly. Then second game, 27-14 Philly into the fourth quarter, even though they didn't have Jalen Hurts for almost that entire stretch. And then Washington got hot late and won one quarter really handily and won one of the games with it. But they also turned it over 5 times. And you can say, oh, well, what a win for Washington despite the 5 turnovers. Okay, well, Philly still forced 5 turnovers also. So you can kind of do that both ways. If you look at how the scheduling goes, both these teams have pretty soft schedules this year. So I think that's something that's going to matter a lot when we get to the next matchup in the Super Bowl, because the other side is going to be a lot more battle tested. But the Eagles are 7-2 against playoff teams, Washington 3-4. And if you look at the defense for Washington, which we know isn't good anyway, when they played a top 16 offense by DVOA, so just top half of the league, they allowed 28 points a game, 9 games, 29.5 the 2 games against the Eagles, 24 or more all but 2. They're bottom 10 against the run. We know that's what the Eagles want to do. Saquon had over 100 yards in the first quarter last game. I love A.J. Brown in this matchup as well. And I just think the script sets up very good for the Eagles if they are the Eagles. If you look at it, I looked at every book. I want to bet Eagles to win through 3 quarters, because here's why. Game 1 that they played, Eagles were up big after 3 quarters. Washington had 149 yards and 10 points. They got some garbage stuff late. They came through the back door a little bit. Game 2, the Commanders have 207 yards through 3 quarters, only 14 points. Then they scored 22 in the fourth quarter and didn't just come through the back door. They won the game. But in the first 3 quarters, really the first 7 quarters against the Eagles, Washington had 24 points in 7 quarters. So I think Vic Fangio against a rookie quarterback who I know has been so good, but in this environment on the road, you have to like Fangio there. So that's kind of the setup for me. I'm obviously leaning Philly's direction. I know you're leaning more Washington's direction. What are you looking for in this one?
In terms of the game itself, I kind of do like it's getting up to 6.5 at a few places. So I honestly, just waiting it out. I have a Washington futures ticket, so that I'm just throwing that out the window. Like I'm just kind of looking at this game from just handicapping the matchup. I am going to wait. I assume Philly money is going to continue rolling in, but I think there's some good props in this game that can be said more than I think both of these lines in both games are relatively right. Like maybe I would want Washington at like 4.5 or 5 if I was projecting it out. So I do think the 6 is a little high, which is why I like it. But I think Goddard props are good. I had him at 35.5 early in the week. I know Stuckey's on his, I believe, 3.5 receptions. I think it's just kind of similar to the Schultz matchup against Kansas City. I think he's going to be good in this one. That's why I like Ertz as well. So I think there's some matchups there for tight ends that I think are interesting. And A.J. Brown, 57.5. was the line early in the week, now up to 60.5. I just think people think this is a good matchup for him on the outside against Washington's defense. And I think flipping it, AJ, good game this week. I think if they make the Super Bowl, I'm going to look to kind of Devontae, which is why I was considering his Super Bowl odds for MVP and things like that now. But I think he'd have a better matchup there. So in terms of just like the prop market, that I think is interesting. I also, when handicapping this game, I kept thinking to myself, Washington goes for it a lot on weird situations. Jake Elliott's having a difficulty making field goals. So I feel like key numbers may be a little odd in this one. Like we might not fall on exactly 7. Like things might happen in this game to kind of throw that off a little bit, which is why I kind of want to wait and get some of those numbers later in the week, like the 6.5, and hopefully it gets up to 7 for what I'm looking for. From just a stat point of view, I think the fact that the Commanders haven't played a home game in is like almost a month and a half at this point. I believe this is like their fourth or fifth consecutive road game. And looking it up, 8th team since 2000, enter a playoff game on a 4th game or later of a road trip, 0-7 straight up those teams. So it's just very, very difficult to go through what they've gone through. And I think a lot of it's adrenaline. You've got a rookie quarterback who's taking a lot of pressure and running it around a lot. I think that has to do with it. So the one more stat before I give it back to you and we can go to the next game, or you can keep going on what you're thinking here. Eagles blowing leads, just not something. I think it's a discussion we've had in the past that just hasn't happened. And I've said this stat on previous shows, but I think it holds for this one, which is a little worrisome on my side if I like Washington. But under Sirianni, Philly 16-0 straight up as a home favorite when they get a lead of 7+ points. When facing a team above 500, I think there's something like 20-2 or something like that overall. But really good opponent, get a lead, home favorite. They usually cruise, and a lot of that has to do with Saquon. But it to me, I think it's what you're looking for in this game: get early lead through 3 quarters, and kind of sail from there. So.
Yeah, so I am on Eagles in this game, but I'll just say I'm light on Eagles here. I'd rather play props. We'll get to the 2 props I like in a second, but I do think that I like Philadelphia a little less now than I thought I would a week ago as I dug into this more. One thing that I looked at today that I expected to go the other way, I wondered, okay, what about the team that upsets the 1 seed in the division round? So you upset the team off the bye week, you get the huge win. There's got to be a huge adrenaline letdown after that, right? Like that team has got to be toast the week after. That's what I thought. So I look back in our bet lab since 2003, we have 13 times where the 1 seed lost last round, divisional round. What happens after that? The team, like the Commanders, that the upsetting team, 6-7 straight up in the next game, where I have to assume you're the underdog again. 5 of the 6 winners went on to win the Super Bowl. So sometimes when you're hot, and you just keep on going. I don't love that for Philly. Here's another one. We mentioned the stat on Sunday Night Recap. Favorites in conference championship division rematches. That's this right now. 4-0 straight up, but by 6.3 points a game. Well, the line is 6.5. So that's not a lot of advantage there. They're 3-1 ATS. The one miss was only by half a point. So again, that helps Philadelphia, but these are close games. Like I think that this is going to end up very close to where we're at here. Jane Daniels, of course, the 6th rookie quarterback to start a conference championship game. None of them have reached the Super Bowl. So you can do some of those numbers, I think, on both sides. The other one with Washington's offense here, where ultimately I am trusting Philadelphia's defense, I think, more than anything else as I pick the Eagles. Washington's offense did not really get tested a lot this year by top defenses. They're 1-4 this season straight up when they face a top 12 defense, and they averaged just under 300 yards a game. They averaged almost 400 yards a game in all their other games. So granted, that's what's supposed to happen. That's why you're a top defense. But if you look just kind of, again, the through the 3 quarters part, Washington was 14 points or less in all but one of those games through 3 quarters, and then kind of found some stuff late. So maybe that sets up for the Eagles not to be the right pick, and the back door is open. This line, I probably wouldn't take it really past the 6. I think, frankly, given everything I've looked at, this is crazy because I'm picking the Eagles -6 here light, but I think Washington money line might actually have the best value of any of the kind of standard picks here, just because, like you said, similar to last week, they're volatile. If they can be in the mix, division closes the gap a little bit. All those 4th down tries closes the gap. It does. I don't think the Eagles absolutely dominate and roll this team. That's what I thought I would think a week ago. But given the Hurts injury And given some of the stuff I looked at about the teams getting the big upset and moving on, Washington probably is live here. That makes them dangerous. So I'm going to play one Washington prop. I like Terry McLaurin to find the end zone again. It's plus 140. Eagles defense has shut down running backs this year. I think it's got to be all passing. So it's got to be Jane Daniels. But if he's passing, it's going to be to Terry McLaurin. Eagles have been top 10 or bottom 10 by DVOA against wide receiver ones this season. Now, look, McLaurin had one game against the Eagles where he had one catch for 10 yards. And they got a lot of hype on Quenyon Mitchell, who's banged up, probably plays in this one, but we'll see how that goes. But if you look at just kind of what I call a true wide receiver one, judgment call, but if I looked at the Eagles' schedule, when did you face a go-to wide receiver one? 14 times they did that. 7 of those guys, half of them, got a touchdown. So I think that this line should be closer to plus 100 because McLaurin, last 8 games, has been a touchdown machine. He has 9 touchdowns in the last 8 games, at least 1 in 7 out of the 8. So regression to the mean, I don't know. That regression doesn't happen overnight. I think he's just going to keep on scoring. I'm not sure Washington scores a ton, but he to me is the guy that I think does score if they get somebody. So McLaurin, anytime touchdown, plus 140. We've got the quick slip for that one. I'm on A.J. Brown too. That's my favorite angle here. But before I get to A.J. Brown, any thoughts on McLaurin here?
I think it's the right call because I think at this point it's a little difficult to try to differentiate between the Dynami Browns and the Almeida Zacchaeuses, and like they've gotten more options, even with like Crowder as we've gone on, as we brought in Dynami Brown into the offense. So I just think picking the number one in this spot is probably the safest bet. I think the other odds have kind of been slashed a little bit, and this one to me, I think you're right. I think it should be a little shorter.
Yeah. I think so too. I immediately as I looked at this one, I thought, okay, I'm on both wide receiver ones. So that's my McLaurin play. But my favorite way to attack this game, despite what we've watched in the postseason so far, is get your nose out of the book and bet some A.J. Brown receiving escalators. So here's the case, and we'll get to a few bets I'm playing on A.J. Brown. Washington, also bottom 10 DVOA against wide receiver one. Even after they traded for Lattimore, it's still been pretty ugly. Again, 14 games for them against what I call a true wide receiver one. Here are some of the games that they've allowed this year. Malik Neighbors, 10 catches, 127 yards on 18 targets. That is a lot of targets. Jamar Chase, 6 for 118 and 2 scores. Amon-Ra St. Brown last week, 8 catches, 137 yards. A.J. Brown, guess who? 15 targets, his season high, 8 catches, 97 yards. So if you look at those 14 wide receiver ones, they averaged 7 catches on 10 targets against the Commanders for 90 yards, scored a touchdown in 9 out of 14 games. Every single one of them got at least 6 targets. Half of them had at least 10 targets. So for whatever reason, whether it's just the defense or the way things are getting played, teams are peppering their top target. Over half of the guys had at least 7 catches. All but one had at least 5 catch. All but one had at least 59 yards. Over half had 90 yards. I think the big reason here is the style of play that Washington is. They top 7 in man coverage, highest of any team left in the playoffs. They're top 7 in single high. Well, A.J. Brown, number 1 PFF grade against man coverage, number 2 yards per route run against single high. So it's time to unleash our inner excellence. A.J. Brown overs, 15 targets last time for him against Washington. That was his high on the season. And don't forget, that was the game when Hurts was out. So a little bit script proof here. If Hurts is a little bit limited, if we get some Pickett or Tanner McKee or whatever else, I think they lean on him even more. So I look at A.J. Brown. What are my numbers for him? I'm putting him at like 8 to 12 targets, 6 to 8 catches, 70 to 115 yards. That's kind of my range for him. I think minimum 5 catches, 60 yards. So I looked at the receptions first, over 4.5. That's the line, about even odds. I don't mind that. That looks pretty good to me. Is over in 10 of 15. But if he gets over that for 5 catches, I'd rather just play the yards. So I'm going to play the line you mentioned, over 60.5 yards, minus 110. If he gets those 5 catches, he's 5 catches this season. He's gone 10 for 10 with 65 yards in those games. So I'd rather just play that one anyway, because of course I could get like 2 catches and one of them is a long one with the way A.J. Brown plays. So we hit that one. So that's the standard play. 90 plus yards. I mentioned true receiver ones have gone over that half of the time against the Washington. So 90 plus for A.J. Brown is 3-1. He's had 89 yards or more, 7 out of 15 games, almost half of his games this season. So more boom or bust, and he has busted real hard the first 2 games, but this is a different matchup. So I like the yards there. You can get both of those A.J. Brown yardage plays in the quick slip. And then just a couple further escalators on him. Receptions, again, not playing that. I'd rather have the yards, but 8 receptions is plus 850. So just a touch there. Washington's allowed that 6 times to wide receiver 1. If you want the touchdown, I do think plus 160 is too long. I don't necessarily love a lot of points in this game. And we got the tush push and all that. So I'm going to stay away from the touchdown, but the numbers check out there as well. I think if you like AJ, I'd rather do the futures on him because I like the Eagles to win. I like AJ to have a big game. I like the matchup next week also, or in the Super Bowl for him. So you can bet 200 yards or more in the playoffs at plus 450. 250 yards or more is plus 1,300. Now, only has 14 yards in 2 games. So I'm basically starting from scratch. But if we're right that we get 90 here, then we're halfway to that first hit and get another big game in the Super Bowl, and it kind of sets up nicely for us. So main bets again, A.J. Brown, over 60.5 receiving yards, 90 plus as well. And then you can check out some of those escalators. But I do think this is finally the game for him to have a big one in the playoffs.
Yeah, you had mentioned it. Against number 1 wide receivers, Washington, 8.1 pass attempts to number ones, almost 75 receiving yards. And then you look at what AJ's done against Washington. I mean, he has 8 targets in 4 straight meetings against them. So obviously he is part of the game plan. So I like that look.